Hi everyone, this is Piper the Sailor Man, Sailor the Piperman here, coming to you. In the background you can hear some beautiful Celtic music. And I'll tell you about some of my ancestors that were from Cork, Ireland. Cork, part of Cork, in Ireland. Back in the 16th century, there was war between England and Spain. Now, there was a group of Irishmen that were being mistreated that refused to fight on the side of England. Oftentimes, they were forced into joining the British ranks, and some of my ancestors, male, said the heck with that. That I know of two male ancestors. They were Irish, but also had Welsh and Viking blood. Now, I traced all that back through my DNA various times, and it's true. The oral history of my family was told to me by my great-grandmother when I was young about these men that came from an island with red hair who were soldiers in the Spanish army. She would say it in Spanish, wild geese. And I'm like, wild geese? What does that got to do with... No, I'm 11 years old. What do I know about Irish history? So after a period of time, I was always interested in Celtic lore and druids, and I grew up at various times close to Irish community, and my grandmother worked for the Irish mob in New York. She's no longer around, so I can't continually know and find out more of what she knew. But in the early 1930s, she worked for the Irish mob in the Bowery. And she became what's called a numbers runner. Now, my grandmother smoked the pipe that was given to her by some Irish mobsters. And they were from the Dannon or Dannon clan. And it so happens that he knew of Irishmen, of those Irish descent that had come fought with the Spanish Armada, came on the coast. I think they fought against Francis Bacon, and the ship was destroyed by the Spanish ship was destroyed by the British ship. So these guys jumped off, swam to shore. They were integrated into the Spanish army on the island of Puerto Rico. They were wild geese. And these two individuals happened to be brothers. And they married local women. As time went on, they became established, and they moved to an area, if you look at one of the videos, of ancestral homeland. So they were given a partial acre each of land for their service and for their dedication. Anytime the Spanish would come, they, having artillery expertise, would head on to San Juan and help the Spanish at the fort. The fort was called the Fortaleza, and they would help them in training the local commoners, Indians, those that were of African descent, those that were mixtures, mestizos, Indian and Spanish, how to use these artillery. And they were very known, and they were given the name caballero, which meant knighted. In Spanish, knighted. They were caballeros, men of the horses. Obviously, they apparently were very good riders on horses. They were very good farmers, and they got themselves involved in the growing tobacco, growing potatoes. So what I knew about my family, oral history, was that they were soldiers of Irish descent, wild geese. Now, you see my pigmentation is very dark, but I show you a picture of my family. They're whiter than snow. I'm the darkest one, so genetically I inherited all the Indian blood that came from Amazon region, and some African ancestors that were not from Africa. They were from Portugal. So obviously the Portuguese had settled Africans, free Africans, and they were domesticated. You call domesticated on Portugal. They were schooled, and they were brought over then with many of the Portuguese to Puerto Rico. So you have Portuguese that landed. You had people from the islands of Mallorca. You had people from Sardinia. You had all kind of people that the Spanish crown gave permissions for migration because the Indians were dying off of diseases, and they wanted to repopulate Puerto Rico with other people, European people, so that there would not be a rebellion, a rise up against colonialism. Now, my ancestors, interesting that my ancestors in the 16th century had children, and they brought families from Cork to Puerto Rico. These women married local Spaniards, local Indian men, and so we came with this group up in the mountains of descendants of Welsh, Irish, and Norwegian. Imagine them, they're very light-skinned looking people. If you go to Puerto Rico, you can swear they're from Scandinavia, but they speak Spanish. And so some of them ended up, they were Jacobites warring against England, and ended up going from Puerto Rico to help the Americans fight against the British in the Revolutionary War. That's how some of my ancestors went from Ireland to Puerto Rico, and from Puerto Rico they came to New York and fought in New York, and so that makes me a son of liberty. It's something you can check that out, Sons of Liberty, and I just filed like 2 months ago, and I have all my DNA and everything. And the interesting thing was that from Puerto Rico, my mother went to New York, and I grew up in New York. I was born in New York, and I lived in an Irish neighborhood because my grandmother was involved in the Irish mob, and I got to know, coming up, the children of those that were in the IRA. Now, I didn't know they were the IRA. I would go to their homes, I would go to their feasts, I would go to the taverns, and so instead of calling me Santiago, they would call me James. That's the English term. So I grew up with Macaulay, McLean guys in school, and we would play baseball. They taught me a thing or two about rugby, and we became great friends, and many of us are still friends today. And some of my cousins end up marrying American Irish people. And well, that's how I happen to have ancestry, going way back. Now I want to go to Ireland. Now how did pipe get to Puerto Rico? Well, these wild geese brought the clay pipes, and they decided to take what was called the ceiba tree and began making local pipes. But they weren't smoking pipe tobacco; they were smoking regular tobacco, and they knew how to cure it. And so they influenced a lot of the music in Puerto Rico, a lot of the Irish. A lot of people don't realize that there were a lot of wild geese. The first soldiers to immigrate to Puerto Rico were about 600. So every year on St. Patty's Day, they celebrate. Now before, I had never gone to those celebrations. I used to go to St. Patty's in New York, up Fifth Avenue, and hung out with, and then in the military, I just hung around a lot of Irish guys, and they would call me Black Irish, but Black Irish means dark black hair, so I had black hair. So they would always josh me about that, and